Welcome back. In our last session, we looked at Jesus' sayings on temptation, faith, and service. Then we analyzed the miracle narrative of the cure of the 10 lepers, which led to a series of sayings on the coming of the kingdom. This was followed by a discussion of 2 more parables, which are unique to Luke: the widow and the judge, and the Pharisee and the tax collector. In the current session, we'll continue our discussion of chapter 18 of Luke's Gospel with the material on the encounter of Jesus with the rich young man. Then we'll examine the healing of the blind man at Jericho, which leads naturally into the encounter of Jesus with Zacchaeus. We'll conclude the session with another parable, this time from the Matthean-Lucan tradition, the parable of the pounds. Recall that the parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector ended with the saying of Jesus, "All who exalt themselves will be humbled, but all who humble themselves will be exalted." This added saying not only interpreted the parable, but it also provides a segue into the next unit, the one on the little children. Jesus shows that the kingdom must be received as a little child in innocence and purity, which again demands humility. Following that unit, we move to the story of the rich young man, who was searching for the key to eternal life. There is no real break between the unit on the little children and the unit on the rich young man. It simply begins with a question, posed by a ruler. The question is, "Good teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life?" The ruler addresses Jesus with the title teacher, but prefaces it with the adjective good. The question has already been posed in the parable of the Good Samaritan in 10:25, but it's the use of the adjective good that piques Jesus' interest here. In his response, Jesus begins in typical rabbinic style with another question: "Why do you call me good?" And then adds what may be the reason for the question: "No one is good except the one God." Now, many translations will render "eime heis ho theos" as "except God alone." However, this isn't an accurate translation. It derives from a later Jewish idea that Israel's God is the only God in the world, a religious position that we have come to term as monotheism. The Greek, however, does not use the term monos. Rather, it uses heis, which is the numeral 1. Hence, the accurate translation would be "except the one God." So Jesus is really implying that in his address of Jesus as good, the ruler may be attributing to him something that belongs to God, which in this case is the truth, but in the general view would be considered to be blasphemy. With that introduction, Jesus goes on to answer the ruler's question with what has been considered by many as the older or more traditional view of the answer. Jesus cites the commandments as the route to eternal life. In particular, he cites the 6th commandment, "Do not commit adultery," the 5th commandment, "Do not kill," the 7th commandment, "Do not steal," the 8th commandment, "Do not bear false witness," and the 4th commandment, "Honor your father and your mother," from the Roman Catholic numbering of the commandments. Commentators have commented on the order, but no one has given a good explanation as to why they're cited here in a different order to the texts of Exodus and Deuteronomy. The ruler reacts positively. "I have done these from my youth." Seemingly, that means that this ruler is well on his way to eternal life. He's been living the commandments from his earliest days. As would be expected, Jesus is going to throw a zinger at the ruler. In his response, Jesus affirms the good work of the ruler, but then presents an alternate view. One thing is lacking. Yes, when all the commandments have been observed, then one can go a step further. Sell all that you have and distribute to the poor. The ruler is being asked to detach himself from his possessions. Truly, the commandments that he has observed from his youth have pointed in that direction, but he has not seen them in that way. Currently, the ruler has treasure on earth. Jesus is asking him to part with that treasure in order that he might gain treasure in heaven. With that hope of treasure in heaven, the ruler is to follow Jesus. He's being called to live for others rather than himself. If he was ever to find happiness, he must be done with all that and live for the other with the same intensity as that with which he had so long lived and loved for himself. The reaction of the ruler was great sadness, because he was exceedingly rich. He could not part with the earthly treasures that he possessed. Great treasures and great riches lead to great sadness. Jesus then applies the situation of the ruler to the situation of the apostles and listeners. Looking directly at the ruler as he perceives his sadness, Jesus says, "How hard it is for those who have riches to enter the kingdom of God." The sense is that the rich's entrance into the kingdom will be with difficulty, not impossible. Many, however, take these verses to mean that riches and the entrance into the kingdom are incompatible. This is not what Jesus is saying here. The next statement of Jesus does little to alleviate this misunderstanding, however. He says it is easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God. Now that sounds like quite an impossibility. To that end, interpreters have tried to play word games with the text to make it less difficult. Many tried to identify the eye of the needle with a narrow gate in the city of Jerusalem. Through this gate it was not possible for a fully laden camel to pass. But today that interpretation has lost significant force. I've been to Jerusalem on several occasions, and not once were we taken to see a gate known as the Eye of the Needle. That leads me to think that such might not exist. On the other hand, some choose to play with the Greek letters for the word camel, which, by the way, is kamelon. They choose rather to read the term as kamelon, another Greek word which means rope or ship's cable. That doesn't seem to solve the problem either. A camel or a rope, neither is going to pass through the eye of a needle, which is the smallest transfixion that exists in the daily life of the Palestinians. So it would seem that the rich might as well forget getting into heaven. The crowd heard this statement and begins to think that way. Then who can be saved? They respond. The implied answer, no one. But again, Jesus comes to the fore with a different view. What is impossible with men is possible with God. The impossibility is from the human point of view. From God's point of view, it is possible for the rich to be saved and to enter the kingdom of God. The way I see it is riches in themselves are not good nor evil. They're neutral. It's what we do with the riches that God has given us that makes them the means of salvation or the means of condemnation. Again, it's our attitude toward wealth, to hold it inwardly or to share it outwardly. We've seen this on several occasions in this gospel. The apostles then chime in on the conversation. We've left all and followed you. They've made the break between their possessions and following Jesus. They've done what the ruler has been unable to do. So they're assured of the kingdom, right? Well, by now we've come to see that Jesus does not deal with the obvious. He responds to Peter. Truly I say to you. That introduction signals that something rather important is coming. There is no man who has left house or wife, brothers or parents or children for the kingdom of God. That delineates exactly what exceedingly rich may mean. The claims of the kingdom of God finally transcend even the most sacred and binding of all human loyalties. The flip side of this, the reversal, if you will, is who will not receive they leave this, who will not receive manifest more in this time and in the age to come eternal life. Do what Jesus requests, and you will be duly compensated in this life and will achieve eternal life in the next. That's the question that began this whole analysis. Noland summarizes it well. He says, the greater wealth, the greater difficulty that stands in the way of finding one's way into the kingdom of God. For the rich, entry is so difficult as to be impossible without the miracle-working ability of God. But the greatness of the outcome is on a scale that corresponds with the difficulty. Present multiple compensation and eternal life in the future. So the ruler may be going away sad, but the disciples and hopefully the others who have heard Jesus will be joyful, rejoicing that they have put their good things that God has entrusted to them to work for the sake of the kingdom. As Jesus approaches the city of Jerusalem, one of the final towns he passes through is Jericho. Jericho was a city that played a significant role in the Old Testament, being the site where the Israelites entered the Promised Land after the Exodus. However, in the time of Jesus, it was a lesser city noted as the magnificent winter capital on the banks of the Wadi Kelt that Herod the Great had built. As you can see on this map, it's not a great distance from Jericho to the city of Jerusalem. As Jesus approaches the city of Jericho, he encounters a blind man who was sitting by the road, begging. Since the Passover was near, this would be a good spot for begging, as many of the pilgrims traveling to Jerusalem would pass by that way. The man is struck by the commotion of people passing, and he inquires what's happening. He's told that Jesus of Nazareth is passing by. It's clear that this blind man was aware of who Jesus of Nazareth was, since when he's told of Jesus, he immediately cries out, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." Now we're aware that Jesus is the Son of David through Joseph from the infancy narrative. But how does the blind man come to that awareness? Martin notes that in Jesus' day, Jewish tradition ascribed to Solomon the power to exorcise and heal. In addressing Jesus thus as Son of David, the blind man may have been seeing him as a later-day Solomon. At first, there is no response from Jesus, but the crowd is quick to silence the man. Those in front rebuked him, telling him to be silent. It's curious that those two terms are used in several places with Jesus as subject and someone from the demonic as object. But now it's reversed. But despite the crowd's attempt to silence him, the blind man cries out, all the more, "Son of David, have pity on me." He will not be silenced. He's persistent in the request. Many see this as an expression of his faith, which will be commended at the end of the unit. Becoming aware of the commotion that was erupting along the side of the road, Jesus approaches and commands that the blind man be brought to him. Jesus asks him, "What do you want from me?" The blind man, addressing Jesus as Lord, Kuria, simply responds, "Lord, let me regain my sight." Clearly, he realizes that Jesus has the ability to set him free from the bond of blindness. Jesus acts immediately, saying to the man, "Regain your sight," and then adds, "Your faith has saved you." This is a reference to the persistence of the blind man, but also to the fact that the man is receiving more than physical healing. Like those previously told their faith has saved them, this man has been rescued from infirmity and evil. His life has thus been transformed. He has received not only his physical sight back, but he has also received a deep insight into who this man is who cured him. The verification of the miracle comes when the man regained his sight and immediately follows Jesus, praising and glorifying God. This becomes an example to the rest, following Jesus, who joined the man in giving praise to God. This blind man wanted his sight so badly that he persisted until he was in the presence of Jesus, who granted his request. What in our lives do we want so badly that we would be similarly so persistent? Having entered Jericho, Jesus comes upon a tax collector named Zacchaeus. As the encounter with the blind man with Jesus was life-changing, so also will the encounter of Zacchaeus with Jesus be life-changing. The narrative begins presenting a remote setting. Jesus has entered Jericho and is passing through. Then follows the proximate setting, introducing the main character of the unit, a man named Zacchaeus. The name comes from a root which means clean or innocent. This Zacchaeus is further described as the chief tax collector and a rich man of Jericho, according to Martin. And he was near the eastern border. Jericho was near the eastern border of Judea on a trade route. As a result, there were significant customs taxes levied on goods transported through Jericho. So, as chief tax collector, Zacchaeus would have overseen all the taxes and the customs taxes collected in Jericho. Thus, it's understandable that he would most likely be quite a wealthy man. But there was a problem. The tax collector, Zacchaeus, sought to see who this Jesus was who was coming through town. But he was unable to because of the crowd. There's a similarity here to the blind man that we just spoke about. The crowd was large, and Zacchaeus was small in stature. So, to solve his problem, he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore tree to see Jesus as he passed along the way. Now, some would see that as rather ingenious, while others would see it as a bit childish. In either case, Zacchaeus has his view of Jesus as he passes by. On visiting Jericho today, one of the places that's usually so as Jesus arrives at the sycamore tree, he stops and spies Zacchaeus in the tree. And immediately he addresses Zacchaeus, "Make haste and come down." Then the reason is given, "For I must stay at your house today." Of all the inhabitants of Jericho, it's Zacchaeus whom Jesus chooses to be his host. It's interesting that this is not negotiable for Jesus. He must stay with Zacchaeus. So Zacchaeus gets his wish. More than his wish. He descends from the tree and quickly prepares to host Jesus. The action of Jesus gets the attention of the surrounding crowd, who begin to murmur. He's going to be the guest of a man who was a sinner, they say. This action of Jesus has had quite an effect on Zacchaeus. He's been introduced as a chief tax collector, and hence more than likely one who has cheated people on their taxes to make himself wealthy. The encounter with Jesus leads him to a true change of heart, a real conversion. Zacchaeus, addressing Jesus as Lord, as a sign of his respect for him, says, "Half of my goods I will give to the poor." Martin points out that this action is a true example of loving one's neighbor as one loves oneself, since Zacchaeus shares with the poor exactly the same amount he has kept for himself. But that's not all. If I've defrauded anyone of anything, I restore it fourfold. This is quite a bit more than the law requires as restitution. In these two actions, Zacchaeus demonstrates to all the grumblers the true fruits of his conversion. Jesus, in response, says, "Today, salvation has come to this house." This is a play on the words for his name, of Jesus' name, that is. As we have pointed out, Jesus, the Greek form of Yehoshua, means God saves, or the salvation of God. Yeho, God, Shuach, saves. Jesus, God incarnate, conceived by the Holy Spirit, has brought the salvation just described to the house of Zacchaeus. And on top of that, he's the guest of Zacchaeus. He continues, he also is a son of Abraham. One of the precious boasts of a proud Jew was that he was a son of Abraham, and shared in the blessing of God just as Abraham did. However, in his shady dealings in taxes, tax collectors, especially Zacchaeus, were considered to have lost that privileged position. Jesus shows this is not the case. Zacchaeus has done exactly what John the Baptist commanded be done for the tax collectors. Produce fruits of your repentance. Saying that we have Abraham as our father does not simply cut it. The unit ends with a final pronouncement. The Son of Man came to see and to save the lost. Recall that the Son of Man is a preferred title of Jesus for himself. In this instance, it is almost equivalent to the pronoun I. As he has said several times in the Gospel, he's not here to save those who are in God's favor. He has come to seek out and save the lost. A few sessions ago, we had 3 parables about that very topic. Now we see the message of those parables put into practice. Jesus is nearing Jerusalem. That last leg of the great journey is nearly completed. Jerusalem will be the place where Jesus will take leave of his disciples and continue the journey to the Father. Hence, as he approaches that city, he gives them some advice on life without him through the parable of the pounds. The context of this parable is overhearing the encounter between Jesus and Zacchaeus, and the immediate approach of the entry to Jerusalem, seeking the lost and the suffering, and the consequences of that, Jesus' own suffering, death, and resurrection. As with many of the other parables in the Gospel, Luke gives us a hint as to how he wants the parable interpreted. They supposed that the kingdom of God was to appear immediately. So what if the kingdom is not as immediate as they suspected? How is one to act? What is one to do? That's the message of the parable. So he begins. A nobleman went into a far country to receive a kingdom and return. Now in Jerusalem, Jesus will experience the passion, die, and rise again. Then he will ascend into heaven, from where he will return. So some say that the nobleman in the parable is Jesus. But as the parable unfolds, we'll see that that is not at all possible. So he calls 10 of his servants and gives them each a mina for a total of 10. Now the mina was equivalent to 100 drachmas, and 1 drachma was approximately a day's wage, or a denarius. Then he gives the command that they are to trade with their money that they have been given until he returns, presumably to make a profit. Now the scene shifts to the citizens of the country where the king is to be installed. The citizens there hated him and sent an embassy to let it be known that they did not want him as king. This would remind the hearers of Archelaus, the son of Herod the Great, who received the area of Judea as ruler. He went to Rome after his father's death to be confirmed as king, but the Jews and Samaritans sent a delegation to Augustus to plead not to make him their ruler. As Josephus notes, Augustus compromised, allowing Archelaus to rule, but denied him the title king until he proved that he was a capable ruler, which he did not. History shows that about 10 years later he was removed for incompetence, and a Roman governor was appointed to rule his territory. So the king returns, and now commands the servants who had received the minas to come, and he seeks an accounting of the servants for their trading. And so the servants come one by one. The first proudly steps up and announces that the 1 mina he had been given has made 10 more. This pleases the king. "Well done, good servant, because you have been faithful in a little, you shall have authority over 10 cities. This is a somewhat disproportionate reward. Ruling 10 cities is quite a bit greater responsibility than trading 10 coins. But he has shown his abilities in the lesser, so he's granted authority in the greater. This is precisely what Jesus has been teaching throughout the gospel. The second comes forward with a similar story of success. His 5 minas have netted him 5 more. This is met with the same pleasure as the previous servant. He's given authority over 5 cities. The trading of the servants seems to be putting much money in the coffers of the new king. But the third to approach tells quite a different story. He returns the original mina with nothing extra. In fact, he did nothing with it save keep it hidden in a napkin. Now, in rabbinic lore, this was one of the stupidest things that the servant could have done. The Mishnah Baba Metzia notes that hiding money in a cloth is a, quote, careless and irresponsible way to guard money. The servant has proven himself both unfaithful and foolhardy. He would have been better off if he had hid the coin in the ground. Then his master gives the reason for his action. Then he gives his master the reason for this action. "I was afraid." Why? "Because you are a severe man, taking what you do not lay down and reaping what you do not sow." The picture of the master that the servant presents is one who looks to his own advantage in all transactions with no thought of others. The master is quick to respond. "I will condemn you with your own words." He then proceeds to repeat the evaluation of the servant of him, seemingly accepting it as correct. Therefore, knowing this, why did the servant at least not put the money in the bank where it could have earned interest? The suggested mode of action would have minimally involved the servant in risk, and would have accomplished the objective of providing some sort of return to the master. So in acting the way he did, the servant both disobeyed the command of the master to do business with the coin, and knowing what he knew about the master, his action did not provide even the minimal return. So the servant fails on all fronts. As a result, the master commands that the pound or the mina be taken from the servant and given to the servant with 10. Now this is peculiar, since the servant with 10 is now the ruler of 10 cities. What does he need an extra mina or pound for? The parable concludes with an appended logion or saying, "Everyone who has will be given more, and he who has not, what little he has will be taken away." Now this statement appeared earlier in the Gospel at Luke 8:18. The question is, who says it here? Is it the saying of the master in the parable, or is it a saying of Jesus? The seeming answer to that question would be Jesus, and thus it's a comment on the situation of the parable. We're to use what we're given, or if we attempt to preserve it, we'll lose it. This may be a primitive form of the contemporary colloquial saying, use it or lose it. Returning to the original situation of the parable, we see a rather gruesome conclusion. The enemies, who did not want the master as king, are to be lined up and slaughtered. In our society and custom, such an action is quite out of place. But in the first century, it was common for kings, upon taking power, to eliminate their enemies in order to establish their position and make the transition smoother. Also, this action shows us why it's impossible for Jesus to be the nobleman in the parable. We have made it to the walls of the city of Jerusalem. This part of the journey is just about finished. In our next session, we'll look at Jesus' triumphal entry into the city of Jerusalem, which will mark the beginning of his Jerusalem ministry. See you then.